Do not attempt to adjust your settings. We have commandeered this channel and are now streaming our pirate broadcast. This is the Pirate Stream. Welcome to the Pirate Stream, Dialectical Dissidents. This is episode 27, if you can believe that. Actually, I want to start with something I think we're pretty proud of, is that on this last episode we just put out, and it's been a while. We haven't done this in a while. We have over 206,000 views on this show for Rumble, so it seems you guys definitely enjoy our conversation. So you can expect plenty more. But it has been a minute. We've had a lot going on. There's earth-shattering things happening. We have our own platforms we're both immersed in. But she also just got married, and I hope you had an amazing honeymoon and all that. It's been you know, the wedding was amazing, by the way. I got the honor of being there, and it was a pretty fun event. The outside the box wedding style, which I hope everybody leans into these days, so it's not all traditional and formal. And I had a really good time.
Thank you. I'm so glad you were able to be there.
Yeah. Great.
And we felt like it was very reflective of us. So
yeah. And Matt Arrett was there. A lot of different people. So it was a good time. I really enjoyed it. But yeah, so we're back and we're happy to be here to get into some. I mean, really, just it's one. I feel like every time we come together, we're like, man, what's going on? It's crazy. It's always the news cycle is such a rapidly condensed thing these days. We don't get together for like a week. It seems like the world has completely shifted. You know.
Yes.
But yeah, there's plenty to get into today, and I think the obvious point that we can I think we're kind of batting around what we would get into, and I think we're just gonna the general Stargate, mRNA, artificial intelligence, which everyone seems to be focusing on, but rightly so, because there's about 500 different topics that you can get into. Courtney's going to get into some things that I haven't even really got myself immersed into that overlap, you know, the really alarming, more so alarming direction that this will go beyond than just what they're telling you. But I wanted to start with a couple things that I thought were interesting in more of a manipulation standpoint. We'll start with this. I think it's important to highlight that the people that seem to be rolling this out, and we were briefly talking about this before, it's interesting that it's obviously the group that people would have expected less. For those that kind of lean into the kind of generalized partisan perspective on things, that, well, they're fighting for freedom and they believe in free speech. So, you know, that kind of thing. And who's to say they do or don't? But a lot of us have predicted that this would kind of be the way this came out. And it does seem to be rolling out. Now, again, we can argue that maybe that's not where this goes. Goes on for months and months, and all of a sudden they're using it to fight for your freedom. It's like, I just don't believe that's going to be what happens. But it's interesting to see step by step as this continues. And actually, before we even get into some of the different points about what I think they're doing to try to hide that, what are your thoughts on it before we even get into everything? Like this, are you suspicious of it? Do you think this is going to help people? Where do you see this going?
Oh, I'm very Stargate and the broader technocracy. I'm very suspicious of it. I don't think it's coincidence that the name Stargate, the CIA Project Stargate, that was all about remote viewing. So when we get into what I've been diving into in a little bit later, you know, they always have to have a spiritual undertone for these things. And there is kind of a belief system and a worldview. And I think for a couple of reasons, I think some of them actually subscribe to that worldview. I do really think there are true Luciferians, and, you know, I'm not saying they're all bad people inherently. And I would say many of them are deceived.
Fair.
You know, because it's couched.
I give you that.
I mean, there are outright Satanists.
I find it hard to believe, though, that somebody could be deceived and not see. I think that those things are on their surface quite a deviation from what we believe as moral and correct and godly.
Yes and no, because when you look at theosophy, it's all couched in love and light and, you know, unity and harmony. And I mean, all these words, I mean, they're masters of manipulating language, right? You know, people who doesn't want love and light? Let's let the plan of love and light to work out. I mean, that sounds beautiful. But when you dive a little deeper, you realize what that actually means. Yeah, that's what so there's always that exoteric veneer and then the esoteric that only the initiated really know. And they have the gnosis. So just to say, I'm just putting that out there. I'm not accusing every person who, you know, falls into this, because there's a lot of the yoga community and hippy dippy community. And you know, I know a lot of them. They're nice people. I don't think they realize they're, you know, abetting a Luciferian agenda.
Well, that's a huge point for all of this, whether it's MAGA itself or, I mean, that's one of the things that we keep talking about, is that a lot of this, the same reason they would use this group to roll it out. It's exactly the point, because they want you to believe.
Look over here and trust us.
That will distractionary, but also just that, like you're saying, is I made this point about Brian High Impact Flicks went to a MAGA rally, and and you're watching these people, and it's easy to fall into this like ideological thing where it's like they're secretly the evil people, but you listen to them and it's like, these are clearly good people who believe what they're doing will lead to goodness for America.
Absolutely.
I just think they're being deceived that that's what's happening, but it doesn't mean that they don't want that. And so that is like everything right now. That's what I'll get into a little bit more in a second around some of these different, like, here I'm sharing a meme that says, I fight this thing. Does that mean he's actually fighting that thing? It's like, but they give you that because it makes it easier for good people to want to believe in a hero,
And I think there's a couple of things. So with Project Stargate, I mean, it was all about like remote viewing, and this is
Men to Stare at Goats, right? Everyone knows that movie.
Exactly, right, exactly. So I don't need to say more about that, but I don't think it's a coincidence they've used that name. But this is what I will say. I think that you can. 'Cause I know I've already gotten so much pushback. I'm really kind of like hated by every side now.
I mean, you're doing something right usually.
It's like, okay. But, I'm just trying to point things out. And I think you can hold two things simultaneously. You can be supportive of some of the good policies and initiatives, even if it's lip service at this point, although, there do seem to be some good things that are happening. And you can be encouraging and supportive of those things while simultaneously pointing out some of the horrifying things you're seeing. And I think you should do that. You have to. And I actually think you have to do both because, if you only look at one or the other, then that's not productive.
It's not accurate.
And
right.
It's not accurate
and this
either.
point we always make is that Donald Trump or any of them, whoever, or Biden, or whoever you believe in, they could be tricked. Right. So it's easy to think that they could just be, that you don't just blindly go along with it no matter what. You hold their feet to the fire more than anybody because you believe in them.
Exactly. Yeah. You hold them accountable. And so, I do see some good things, being rolled out, and I'm, grateful for that. And I think we should encourage those and support those. And then we need to say, hold up, what is going on with some of these crazy appointments, this technocracy stuff. So technocracy is not, as we always talk about, the two parties, it's not left, it's not right. However, a lot of the, what I call the futurists, they think they plan the future, or they think they predict it because they have, gnosis from their ascended master. But it's pretty easy to predict the future when you plan it. So
So I was just gonna say.
So but people like Brzezinski and Kissinger, they wrote extensively about how these various ideologies would be pitted against each other, and the technocracy would emerge. It would be a Hegelian synthesis. They didn't necessarily use that terminology, but that is what they outlined, and I think that's what we're witnessing right now.
Matt Ehret wrote a series originally for his website, but I've published it on TLAV about the UFO history. And it's the same conversation
about that.
Right, but it's one part of it. But he definitely believes that was like this religious, like creating like this new religious direction, it's interesting, as well as it perfectly merges with the one world government agenda, right? That's what they're Blue Book and Blue Beam, and the overlap of the two agendas,
And what did Reagan say? That the best way to unify the world would be to present an extraterrestrial threat?
And who just said that? So somebody else just reiterated that. It was Jake Sullivan. Literally just said that again in like this podcast. They do it all the time like that, where they think it's not like on CNN or Fox News. They're like on some podcast. And so we still see it, but the mainstream community kind of collectively pretends it's not there. He literally was like, and an alien, or I don't know exactly what he said. I read the quote, but literally said exactly that if an alien, like as if he was like, I don't know, like an alien, like, it would bring us all together. It's like, it was very staged as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Let's start with the solutions, or rather the positives that you bring up, because I'm right there with you. That, like, whether like Ross being released is an obvious one, right? I think that's a very positive thing. Obviously, there's a lot of pushback from people, and we can all have our opinions that he should have been released because he's a drug dealer. And it's like, frankly, I think you aggressively misunderstand the situation, but that's just me. But it's point is, it's good to call something out like that I think is objectively a good thing, not like and then so and so, other than the obvious, no matter what, universal caveat that just applies left or right, that people use things like that to hide or keep momentum, to basically usher in something else. That doesn't mean the thing is bad all of a sudden. It just means they use good things that we want. And that's just a universal thing, nonpartisan. But so that's important to point out. But I would say that there's others out there that I'm getting a lot of pushback from.
He did pull out of the WHO. Like the first day,
that's a perfect one to start with, right? It's definitely a win. But the thing, and this is how this gets frustration from people that just want you to go, yay, he did it, we win. That there's obviously a concern there based on what happened last time. So right now, win. I think that's a positive thing, and I've always said that no matter who, I think it's a problem. But last time, we saw a very interesting thing that's gotten a lot of pushback already from the partisan field, that the reality is pretty simple. That last time he pulled out of the WHO, it was like millions of dollars. Then the Trump administration through U.S. aid put, I think, like it was billions into Gavi that went into WHO.
Here's the thing, that is kind of a misunderstanding, really, because that deal was in place before the Trump administration.
Enough. Well, that's not
it was indeed, that was in place, and they were separate. They're separate deals.
Definitely. But the reality nonetheless is, and we can, I don't agree entirely that was just an entire thing that was created beforehand. The idea of funding was the amount, and the conversation happened under Trump's administration. But my point is, whether or not we disagree on that, is that Donald Trump, just like all the rest we're talking about, has the ability to stop or continue that. He could have said no, just like all the rest we're talking about. So my point is, and this is, hold on, the only point we're making, the only point is that under his administration, he removed that funding and then continued to allow Gavi to be funded through Bill Gates, who last time influenced him enough to get RFK out of the way.
Bill Gates on.
That's what I'm saying. And so that became this refunneling. And it's the interesting thing is, anything that happens under Biden, even if he's not involved, is Biden's responsibility. I agree with that. Yeah. But when it comes to the other side of it, and the left does the same thing in reverse, is that it's only, the others, he wasn't involved with that decision. Well, it was his administration.
I'm not saying he wasn't involved, but I do think, and this is not to justify it. I'm not happy he gave that money to Gavi. I do not support Gavi. I do not support Bill Gates
left or right.
That's not, exactly. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think that there are, unfortunately, the nature of politics or any kind or business, is you do have to make deals. And so in order to get something done, sometimes you're going to have to compromise in other areas.
I guess that's fair. I mean, but I have a hard line for compromise when it comes to politics these days for that very reason. But it's a fair statement. But here's the thing. Is it about the fact that I think immediately people become very defensive about, and rightly so, with the way the world is, that we're attacking Trump? Let's just make it, not you, but I mean, generally, let's just make it not about Trump. This is what I was trying to really stress to people online, whether Whitney, Derek, or myself, that kind of got bull rushed about this conversation, which is that all we're saying is that under his administration, and let's just even say it was not Donald Trump, but the U.S. administration at the time, right or left, decided to allow the money to continue. So all we're saying is today, before we start jumping and cheering about the WHO, let's wait to see what happens. Like, still say good move, but be on guard. That's and just got this crazy pushback, because I think the feeling is that we just won't accept a win when we see it. And it's like, that's just not true. I just very on guard, left or right. The same thing we were calling out under Biden aggressively, because he's just as deceptive. But it's weird that people in the partisanship they just don't want to. I guess I get it. We want to win. I get it that we desperately need to see a positive today, but we got to be careful, because that's this bigger conversation we're having right now, is using moves like that to hide something else. Like, let's say, ending the Fed, if they do, but then right behind it, you find your private CBDC coin, or rather, private version.
Well, he did. So two things. Two things.
Before we get to that, finish your thought on.
So I'll finish my thought on this. So I do want to say that it is really important to highlight the wins, and that doesn't mean that you ignore the other. But the reason you have to highlight the wins is because otherwise you completely demoralize a nation. That's the first stage of a color revolution, is successful demoralization.
Yeah, but sometimes there might be a need for a revolution. And that's not to say that it's being engineered. I don't mean violently. I'm just saying, realize that just because people are deciding to see,
this is where I understand, the American Revolution is how we ended up here. Although I would argue in this case and these times, I personally don't think we need revolution. I think we need restoration.
Each opinion, right?
Yeah, I think that's my opinion. I would like to restore.
About whether we think our current government structure is even salvageable. I do not.
Right.
But this is a difference of opinion, right?
Yes.
So that's a fair right there. We can amicably go, okay, well, let's hope and see how it works out. But
I well, if we truly restore the Constitution.
Fair enough. That's what I think in the cards.
Right.
I wish. I hope so.
So, and that's where the Convention of States is coming in, and I don't support that either. When you look at the funding behind it, I mean, it's all people who claim to be conservative, but it's these big think tanks that have historically been like Koch brother money, Mercer Family Foundation. And
to your point, just be let's say they rolled out something positive, you wouldn't go bad just because they did it, right? We would say, well, that's still a positive,
they did something positive. I was like, great, I'm glad they did something good. We need to hold on to that and make sure that continues. Right. But with the CBDCs,
well, hold on before you go into it, because I don't want to talk about that. So, but this is where I see the problem with this is, right now it's obvious, and we can get back to the mRNA AI overlap.
They're
rolling out this mRNA cancer drug direction, right? And now they brought in I mean, I don't see RFK in the conversation. I don't even see Elon Musk in the conversation. You got
Right.
Sam Altman and Larry Ellison at Oracle. And I'm like, and he even said Altman's like the leading AI guy. I'm like,
and Larry Fink.
It just doesn't make much sense right now, other than like we told you so. That's how I'm feeling this is going. But my point is, so if we're over here talking about, pumping the brakes on these, like the idea is that I think those things are contradictory, right? That's where I just see this is going in the direction that kind of proves that it's not what we're being told it is. You see what I'm saying? And it's same for all of these.
But those things are supranational.
My point is the WHO is the direction that we all recognize in where this goes. Right. And so he pulls away from this.
Yes.
Good thing. But if we can stand back over the next 2 months and see that he went twice as hard in the very same direction, and that Bill Gates
get out of the UN altogether.
Fair, right? I would love to see that. But see Bill Gates is already claiming, and we haven't seen it flesh out yet because it was only from Bill Gates' side of it, but 2.0 warp speed and all this.
I know.
So this is what I'm saying. If we can't stand back and objectively go, okay, like I like to see the move on WHO, but it's only been an executive order, which only applies to the executive branch. It's not really a law. That's all I'm trying to do. Just let's not. I guess it would be the reverse of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Let's just hold back until we really see it, but still acknowledge the win. Yeah. Most people don't like that. They want you to do jumping jacks and cheer for it before.
Well, no, I think what we should do is we should champion that. We should cheer it. We should push further. Okay, great. You got out of the who.
Exactly.
What's next?
But is that what's happening? They're going, we did it. Like we won, and that's the problem.
You can't, no. It needs to be great. We really support this. Okay, what's next? Like, I think it should be complete severed ties with all UN adjacent entities. And that would solve a lot of this technocracy problem. I mean, Google officially partnered with the UN. So, I mean, that would mean Google's out, right? Unless
they're working through the administration. But I agree, though. It's a step in the right direction, right? I agree completely. So that's all. That's the point.
Just one example, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of these different things. So now, the point being with like the CBDC point. And so go ahead and start. It's the same point.
So this is my concern. I'm very, very, I like the fact that he has, rejected the CBDCs.
Kind of.
That's great. I think that is definitely a good step in the right direction. My concern, however, and I've been screaming about this for quite a while, is that I thought that, because my thing is always the Hegelian tactics, and that's what I've studied and that's what I see over and over again. They seem to be masters of it. So I really thought that you'd be presented with these two sides, and a lot of the not just the right, I mean, really everybody, but definitely the right, the quote unquote right, have been, very conditioned and warned about the CBDCs. They are not in favor of it. They don't like it. They understand, rightfully so, the perils that it might present. And so there's been a lot of pushback. So I actually didn't think that was going to be our biggest threat. Now, my concern is that they're going to give you this other option, this other shiny, and it's going to be an opt-in tyranny situation.
A what?
An opt-in tyranny.
Okay. Yeah.
So you are going to, it's kind of like, I know they can't prove the direct correlation between LifeLog and Facebook, but I think it's such a great example.
I think we all know. I mean,
February 4th, 2004, LifeLog got shut down.
It's the same point I'm making about XAI DARPA to XAI Elon Musk. It's the same effing thing.
I know. And Peter Thiel's and Elon's company X. I mean, but whatever. If you can't connect dots, and it's.
But it's a fair point to be objective.
I get it. We haven't found the exact, smoking gun to link those two, but the evidence does point in that direction. So, then February 4th, 2004, of course, Facebook went up, but now Facebook is not a violation of the Fourth Amendment. So, and that was the argument with LifeLog, because Facebook, you opt in, it's a private, well, not just a private company, but you choose, you sign the consent form.
That too, I mean, like the difference between a private entity, even in the realm of censorship, like it's a different conversation. But you're right,
it is, but really, but the opt-in is huge.
Because I get what you're saying.
Because you're choosing, I want to share all my. And I'm guilty of it. I signed up for Facebook, like I want to share all of my pictures and, my stuff with my friends and my family. And I'm going to give you all my data because this is how I connect with all my old high school friends.
I haven't done that in a long time, but I'm guilty of it in the beginning too.
Yeah, I'm on it a lot less these days, but yeah, so I choose that. And, if you are subscribing to, and I think it's important to acknowledge this worldview, whether you are a Christian or, traditional, biblical framework subscriber, there's the people who, right, both Lucifer or Satan and God want to be chosen. Biblically speaking, neither can force their will on you. And so
it's about the choice. It's about faith. Like it's about making that choice.
It's making that choice. But I think this is a really important foundation to understand, because that's what happens. So whenever they create these systems, they want you to choose it. So I think what's now, so just the CBDCs, I really saw that was going to be rejected because it is top down, it's forced, and it is so centralized. So now what we're seeing is all of these movements towards some sort of cryptocurrency. And there is something called the network state. I don't know how familiar you are with the network state, but the network state is it's a concept that from a book that Bajal Srinivasan, he was the CEO of or CTO of Coinbase. And so he's written this book, this whole framework for what will be a network state. Peter Thiel is very supportive of this network state concept.
Well, I know you're getting to it, but go explain what that is for people.
Sure.
I'm
so it is loosely based, and he actually has a whole chapter in his book saying that it is part of the inspiration for this network state was seasteading, which was a concept that Peter Thiel invested. I think $1.7 million was the last report that I saw. Not a huge amount of money for him, but good chunk of change. It's certainly more than I could do. So it's a lot of money. But they found that it wasn't feasible. But the concept of seasteading was that you would have these, basically these nations, these civilizations that are on the ocean. So they're not, obviously they're outside the jurisdiction of any kind of national laws. And they would be these kind of, just entities that would be under, I guess in some cases, maritime law, but they were separate. And but it didn't work out. They felt like it wasn't feasible.
The objective, being to create new civilization outside the law kind of thing?
Well, the objective was really the dissolution of nation states.
Right. Okay. So I see this overlapping very clearly on land with the thing of like Prosperos and Freedom Cities.
Exactly. Is part of, the network state actually has a website. And so network state concept is that you will have a dissolution of nation states.
Oh, I see. So like homesteading, like seasteading. I don't know. Ocean. I get it now. I'm just putting it together.
Yeah.
I was picturing with sea. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. No, sea, like the ocean. Yeah. And so now what they're saying is you're going to have these cyber nations. So it will be, they talk about where it's not going to be geographical nation states. Instead, they will be ideological nation states that are connected through cyber networks. So you could have I don't know, I just pick in the fitness industry, everybody's so, combative. Everybody thinks their way. So like the carnivores versus the vegans, right? You'll have a carnivore nation state, a carnivore network state, and like a vegan network state. But here's the thing. They all have currencies, cryptocurrencies. And now people think like, oh, if it's now private and it's like that you can't be locked out, you still need a digital ID. You still need a currency to get in. You basically still have a social credit system, because what happens if that network state decides that, they don't want you anymore, or you don't belong in their clique, you're booted out, your password doesn't work anymore. What happens if you just forget your password?
Yeah.
I can see a whole bunch of problems. And so I know there are a lot of, I'll just add one more thing to it. I know there are a lot of people who are very supportive of Bitcoin. They think that that's like, the hope for freedom and, restoring some sort of getting out of a fiat currency. And now, as long as there is this, finite system within the Bitcoin, which can change, and it could also be regulated out in favor of other cryptocurrencies, then, maybe I'm not as supportive of the whole Bitcoin thing. I think it's kind of a honeypot. But what you are seeing is now you're seeing like the Trump coin, the Melania coin, and they started out with, we have limited coins. And then now all of a sudden they have
There's
more
pump and dumps everywhere. I mean, they're clearly just taking advantage of people, in my opinion. That's what I think.
I mean, it's I think it's more representative of building a culture.
Oh, totally. That too. Like you're saying. Absolutely.
They're conditioning people.
Right.
And what they're really conditioning people for, in my opinion, is, and don't have to get into the full thing right now, but I'll just outline really briefly, is because I think there's a huge convergence between this gamified society, a tokenized economy is what they're talking about, but it's gamified, and this network state. And I've been really deep diving this concept called Game B, which is not new. It's been around since 2011, but they're really ramping up now. And there seems to be just in my mind, it looked like this was going to funnel right into the network state.
It does. It sounds like it.
It does. And I've actually looked at the network state website, and they have the top of the list is Prospera, which makes sense. This is
of course
Peter Thiel.
Tell you guys, you know how far ahead I was. I've been calling this out for so long. It's funny that popped out of nowhere. So go ahead.
Yep. That's like one of the first ones that comes up on the list. And there's a lot of them, but at the very end, what you see is pending approval is Game B. And so just really, really briefly, and we're going to discuss this much more later, but Game B started out as a political movement. It was Jim Rutt is kind of like the granddaddy of Game B. He was, for those of you who are not familiar, he was the CEO of Network Solutions. He's invested in a lot of tech, a lot of tech companies, tech venture firms, and so he's very involved in tech, and he was also the chairman of the Santa Fe Institute. So he's so the Santa Fe Institute is kind of like the science echelon there, and I put it in air quotes for a reason. They're very they study systems theory, complexity theory, and that's what he calls himself, a complexity theorist. But really what they are, in my opinion, is like the cybernetic arm of Esalen, which Esalen had a lot of overlap with cybernetics anyway. But interestingly enough, cybernetics is reviving. Not that they haven't been using it all along, but the Association for Cybernetics has ramped up, and they're now calling it the new Macy. They're actually doing new conferences. They have a whole YouTube channel with all their new, and I think it's because the technology is catching up. So this Game B concept is that we really, to me, it's the rebranding and the technocracy version of the spiritual new age lingo, where they would say we're moving out of the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. So
which we talked about recently, actually.
Yeah. Oh, you did. Okay.
No, you and I.
Yeah, that's what we talked about last time. Exactly. Yeah. So this tracks right in line with that. So this idea that the Pisces was all about the individual. It was all about the industrial age, which feeds off of competition, and now we have to move into the age of Aquarius, which is about the collective, which is about cooperation, collaboration. But really what these people want to do is, so their word is collective intelligence, which sounds very Jungian, collective unconscious. Anybody remember that? But what they talk about, and they openly talk about Teilhard de Chardin's vision of a noosphere. And actually, some of these technologies are directly based on trying to foment the noosphere. But their term in Game B, there's a Game B wiki site, and their term is really collective intelligence. And so global brain.
All of these, I mean, everything you just laid out. I mean, think about how all this overlaps and what you're saying, like with the every direction, like the AI discussion, like what you're saying. But what the first thought jumped to my mind with the network aspect is like, it's an illusion. I mean, technically there's reality there. We use digital things, but like if you end up leaning into this, it's like, fine, have your fake society on your metaverse. We'll let you pretend you're free in there, but your real life is completely locked down by the actual control structure. That's the first thing. And then you overlap that, what you're talking about. I mean, it overlaps with the globalist idea. All these different discussions. Go ahead.
Well, add one more thing. So the network state is very much appealing to, we talk a lot about, the left and the right. So what I'm seeing now is a real, anchoring to libertarianism. And so
an illusion of it, right?
It's a very utopian vision, which I think all of these things are. Game B, the network state, I think is very utopian. I wish it existed. Honestly, some of it sounds great, but
presented as such. I don't think that's really what it is.
Right. What I said to you is I think that it's presented as a utopia, but I think it's going to manifest as dystopia. Unfortunately. And I'm not saying there aren't problems with the current society or that they don't present some, things that sound great. I'm not saying that. However, I think it will result in dystopia. But the libertarian aspect of it, of course, Peter Thiel presents himself as a libertarian. It's all about freedom and it's all decentralized. Game B always talks about DeFi, decentralized finance. I don't know how everything's interoperable and you have like the one app, decentralized app that interacts with everything, connected with everything, but somehow it's decentralized. But
that's what I'm saying. There are buzzwords right now that are being floated around. Like even with this AI Stargate program, people are literally pretending this is a decentralized program. Guys, it is not. I mean, you can look at it. And same thing with Paul and the libertarians. You do not lean into the state your entire career and bolster the national security. Everything he's done has been in the interest of what's opposite everything is not libertarian. It's just, it's wild.
And if you just look at the roots of a lot of these libertarian ideas, you look at people like Hayek and von Mises, and I know they split and there was the whole Rothblatt fight. I get it. But a lot of times these warring factions end up in a Hegelian synthesis. So I'm not saying they didn't have ideological disputes amongst them. They did. And that's valid. However, Hayek and Mises formed something called they were part of. It was originally called the Walter Lippmann Colloquium. Walter Lippmann, the propagandist who worked with Edward Bernays, kind of an open Fabian socialist, not a libertarian, socialist. So he formed this Walter Lippmann Colloquium, and at the outgrowth of that was something called the Mont Pelerin Society.
Mm-hmm.
The Mont Pelerin Society is this huge consortium of these think tanks that people often champion as being quote unquote conservative. Some of the big names you might be familiar with are like the Heritage Foundation, the Hudson, Hoover, all these think tanks that you think are so conservative. And part of that is another consortium called the Atlas Network. The Atlas Network is a huge consortium, and one of their, big organizations is called AFP, Americans for Prosperity. I call them, Americans for Propaganda. So they all look like they label themselves. They put a little bow on them and they say that they're conservative, they're right wing, they're libertarian leaning, because of course, they were founded by Hayek and Mises. And although people often don't acknowledge, I'm not saying Hayek didn't present some good things in Road to Serfdom, but his last chapter literally says, the solution to all the world's problems would be to have an international world order. I'm paraphrasing, but he basically alludes to that we need some sort of an international world order in order to solve a lot of the major problems in the world.
Well, that does seem, no matter libertarian or otherwise, it seems no matter what, if you're starting at a status point, it's going to end up there. Yes. That's where we're always coming from, guys. And it's not to say that there's not, maybe that's just not possible in some people's minds. But I think it's interesting is even with the best of intentions, if you're starting with a central government or statist idea, that's the logical conclusion historically. That's a different conversation, but I want to point that out.
And those, both of those organizations were very heavily funded by people like the Atlas Network is Koch brothers. So I know there's only one brother now, but well, I wanted to go back to, so the CBDC point, which it's so what you just pointed out there is terrifying and obviously important with, so actually before I go back to it, so do you feel that what they're rolling out with Stargate is that or interconnected with what you just laid out? I think it's interconnected. Obviously this Stargate project is a little bit more centralized. It doesn't have as much of the, appeal of being decentralized. But what it is doing is creating the infrastructure for that kind of AI technology. And they need, and of course, America has the resources for that. So they want to capitalize on that and build that infrastructure here. And a lot of the companies who are involved with it are Silicon Valley, or Wall Street, they're here. So they're trying to garner the acquiescence to do that. But this all feeds into, so there's kind of like the top down, and then there's the what's the illusion of the grassroots option. And ultimately, I think they're both going to end up merging. It's going to be the same thing, or you're going to have a choice of one or the other, but they're both going to funnel into the same, end result. But the top down is the UN Centennial Plan for an AI world society.
Right.
And that's what I think Stargate is building the infrastructure to be able to have, and also doing a lot of the beta tests. One of the things, and when we get into Stargate, we can talk about this, but like one of the things that came up in 2020 and everybody was like, you guys are such crazy conspiracy theorists, this is nuts and patents don't mean anything. So sorry if I sound a little frustrated, and I'm not saying patents always mean that the technology is being used or will be implemented, but patents aren't that easy to get. They're kind of expensive. So it's like, why do they have this? But, Microsoft, who's part of Stargate, has this patent 666. Well, it's like 060606 for cryptocurrency using body activity.
Yeah, we were just looking at this the other day. I'll bring it up. Go ahead, keep talking.
Okay, so using body activity data, and of course in 2020, many of us were labeled just crazy conspiracy theorists for even suggesting that this could be part of their master plan of what's going on. But when you start looking at what's going on when you read the blueprint actually for the AI World Society, they literally talk about the Internet of Nanobio things.
Right.
So it's like, well, how are they going to do that? They talk about how you'll have these sensors running all through you. and that will connect to the internet of bodies, the internet of things, and that they will be able to, but it's all couched in for your good. I mean,
of course, yeah.
You know, and so many of us opt into it. You know, we want all the data for our health, the biometric data, so we know how many steps we've taken. I'm guilty of it, you know, and so that's how, but it's incremental, right? This Fabian socialist model of incrementalism. So incrementally, they keep laying these things, and we become desensitized. Like,
right.
if they had given us these, they didn't have the technology for it, but if they had even suggested us opting into biometric data, people would have been like, oh my gosh, you're going to surveil like every step I take and how much I sleep and all this. But now we become desensitized because we already have these little things that we carry around all the time. We already are in it. It's like, okay, we'll just add one more. And that's kind of what they're building. They're laying that groundwork. And then eventually everything is going to be surveilled. And if it can be surveilled, it can be controlled.
Yeah. And that's what I agree, except right now it does feel a little bit more rushed than usual.
Oh yeah.
I think we're all
ramping
like
up.
Day 2, mRNA AI shot, you know, it's like, whoa, everyone, like, I think they just I think they overstepped a bit, but I think as just like with COVID, there seems to be some kind of a rush time frame. I think there's a lot of different ways we could point at that. But before we get into more, I want to say about the CBDC point, you know, still on the idea of, you know, the positives essentially, you know, is that it's important to highlight, and I have that as well pulled up. The first thing that stood out to me that I do think is odd about this is, and this is how these things tend to go. So this is the actual executive order. And the thing, again, a broad point, guys, we need to acknowledge that this tit for tat executive order back and forth every 4 years is absurd. And it's
not constitutional.
It's not. And it literally proves that we don't live in the representative government we think we do. And as one of the many points, if every single, I mean, this is more than ever, but so too was the last time. And then time before that, like Biden to Trump, you know, or Trump to Biden, back to Trump.
It kind of really started with Lincoln.
or and Obama before them too. You know, the point is it's been an ongoing process where they more and more and more. And I think we both talked about like rule by executive order going back years. Now we're in the same point, and no one's going to argue that it's illogical to say, you know, it's illogical to understand the argument to say, well, I'm doing it this way because they're going to do this. And fine, that's a logical point. But if the idea is that this is always how it goes, it's never going to stop. It's just like lesser of evils. It's always going to end up in this position. And so all it's going to be is, even if you think it's the best move in the world, 4 years later, somebody could go right back to the direction with all the executive orders.
Well, and I always say, I mean, if you're going to say, because I personally believe we should restore the Constitution, you can't be in favor of unconstitutional moves when it's what you want to see. You either have to, you know, support restoring the Constitution, or you want to do away with it and you're going to move forward with it. So I'm in favor of executive orders when it's repealing, but not when it's, you know, creating.
Well, but even then, I mean, I get why sometimes there might be necessary moments for that, but this is why, like, executive action, because there's also memorandums, there's different ways to do it. My point is that it needs, that is I would argue it shouldn't even exist. I mean, realistically, because of how it's abused. Because the reality is you end up doing something that technically only applies to the executive branch, and it gets dictated around the world, essentially, for a lot of these things. He's running executive orders that apply to the world. It's crazy. And so we're going so far above and beyond. On top of that, he has essentially the most control you can have over a current situation in our government system, right? You have both houses. So it just doesn't make any sense. But anyway, that's the obvious point to make. On top of that, you know, we're talking about leadership in digital finance technology. That should be a red flag for everybody that has been calling this stuff out just based on the title. But I agree that getting into this, it's important because he does say in here that we're essentially banning CBDCs, right? Did I pass it already? Hold on. There.
Yeah.
So here's what I think is important to highlight, though. Where is it? Did they change? Oh, here it is. Okay. So what's important is under this, the prohibition of CBDCs, right?
Yep.
It says, first underline, except to the extent required by law. And then goes on to say that we will ban these. So to me, it's like, okay, well, that's still a good step in the right direction. But all that really means is if we decided, if we pass a law, which this doesn't actually count as a law, technically, it's an executive order. So that means that all this is him feigning the stopping of it. And then Congress will pass a law and he goes, oh, the bad Democrats did it. Like, that's what I sense from that. But either way, doing this is a good step. So right out of the gate, that gives me the sense that it's not definitive. There's no teeth to it. But, you know, the overall point, though, is that, as Whitney and Mark Goodwin have been calling out for a while, that the stable coin private version is actually more likely and far more dangerous.
Far more dangerous.
Go ahead, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's essentially what I'm saying. That's why I've been looking into this network state and this game B stuff, because I think that is actually way more dangerous. I'm not saying I'm in favor of a central bank digital currency.
I don't think anybody is.
I mean, like, I think that's just kind of like the obvious. It's like danger. Obviously, like, we're not putting our hand on fire. You know, we get that.
There's your Hegelian dialectic, right? I mean,
yes.
you've given the worst possible thing that they've trained you not to want.
Yes.
And then you take what's given instead.
I'm very concerned about it. But I actually think so. We've seen this like through the past, especially the past like half century. I mean, I think longer, but definitely the last 50 years, we've seen that, okay, you know, people don't want this top down kind of move. So what they're going to do is put everything through public-private partnerships.
Right.
This is what we see, you know, I think really like, and now it's so egregious with education, right? And that was the plan that Charlotte Iserbyt was screaming from the rooftops about. And they're still, because now you have all these, again, presented under the false banners, right? Americans for Prosperity are championing school choice. Well, don't you want choice for your child's education? Well, no, because that's government choice, and there's no government choice. If the government funds it, it runs it. You know, that's not choice.
Well, this is the partisan aspect of it, though, because they've been trained, and I think this is an increasing minority, but they frame it as the majority to think that if my side does it, it's the good or better version. It's better than their evil.
Yes.
Like that's everything.
I experienced it firsthand when I went to state capitol. I'm going to be going again this week. You know, when I went to them, they actually said to me, we're the Republicans, we're the good guys. Why are you arguing with us? And, you know, thinking I was a Republican. And I said to them, you know, with all due respect, I don't care if you have an R or D in front of your name. And I said, I actually wish that we had a Democratic governor, because then you would have something to push back on. You would actually read these bills, and then maybe you would question them, because my concern is, are you limiting our rights? Are you limiting parental rights? Are you expanding tax spending and the taxes in general? Are you misappropriating, misallocating? Are you creating these backdoor loops with these public-private partnerships?
Right. All of which is unconstitutional. Literally everything you just said.
Right? Yes. And I'm like, these things, I'm concerned about the Constitution. I don't care what letter you have in front of your name or what letter the bill has in front of his name. And I feel that way about all of this. And so when you see these public-private partnerships, though, they say, okay, so now it's in the private sector. First of all, in the private sector, much more can be, you know, covert. They don't have to disclose nearly as much when it's in the private sector. But now you're not just, when private sector does this, oftentimes it's not really outside the government purview, because they work through the liaison of these NGOs.
Well, I would say that's exactly, which is what you're highlighting. I mean, we talked about this at like the World Economic Forum, really introduction. They made this the big thing. It's been around for a lot longer, as you know, but the public-private aspect is so they can choose which side to play you from. Right. So if they don't want you to be able to see the information, they go, well, it's a private company, we can't do it. But the government is still immersed with that. I mean, this is basically fascism as far as I'm concerned.
It's fascism.
That's what we're talking about.
Yep. And I think what they're rolling out is utopian techno-fascism.
Yep, exactly.
And where they want to go with it is feudalism, techno-feudalism.
Right.
So,
well, you know, so the thing is there's plenty of other things we can point out that I think in some ways are positive steps. Like, I mean, Frank, if we're going to be just general about it, signing an executive order that says we're saving free speech, whatever that means. Yeah, good. Fine. I mean, that's a nice thing to say if it translates into something that actually means that. Well, but it's like, those are the kind of things we're seeing. There's plenty of things you could say are in the right direction, but it's how they're going to be put.
I don't understand this one. I just don't really understand. So the Biden-Harris administration in November of 2024, they had signed on with the UN's Global Digital Compact. So that automatically censors free speech, right? Especially online. So I don't know why now Trump administration has come in and they're saying we're, you know, preserving free speech, which is great. I hope they do. That's great. We should be very encouraged by that and supportive of it. But why wouldn't they immediately take us out of that deal?
That's what that's what I keep talking about.
I'm like, wait, why are you letting that slide? That needs to be severed. Like, well, done.
Think about it like this. Like, okay, so here's an interesting one of these things I think we're like deliberately flamed, so we missed what's happening, is with like January 6th thing. Like, again, it's great. Again, that's actually one we should have noted. That's a positive. There's no ifs, ands, or buts around that. Like, I think that's a positive thing.
For sure.
But what happened around it, which is interesting, is that, and you could call this a petty choice, which probably it was. They released them up until that night and then said, well, we're going to release more in the morning. And everyone, like Jones, the rest, started flaming this as they were refusing to let everybody out. As best I can tell, they have let the rest of them out. And since then, the point is there's only a couple that, interestingly, the way that worked out is that they didn't show for court. And so then that was a violation. Now they said, we are pardoning them for everything Trump removed, but they are still hot. I'm like, well, that was for a crime that he's pardoned now. So should it all be a wash? Either way, there's two of them apparently that are still being held for that charge, but they are pardoned for everything else. My point is they flamed the story. People were like trying to find out where these guards lived. I mean, it got crazy. And all it was that they just, the next day, and they released the rest of them out, as far as I can tell. It seemed like a really interesting thing. My point, though, is that there's a lot of those where they're, I was going somewhere else with that. There's other, shoot, I just forgot my train of thought there.
Taking them, I was talking about taking the, out the Biden partnership with the UN.
Thank you. Okay, well, so the point is, like right there, if you're able to think they can just write this paper out and it's instantly effective, but some things are kind of like that. So your point is, if he really wanted to, he could have done that. But instead, like I saw another example. I think I might even have it here, where it was about like North Carolina, because I think it was, David Knight. David Knight shared just a comment, which is fair at the time, saying, okay, well, $500 billion for AI. What about the people in North Carolina? Because that was like kind of the way they were doing it before with Biden. And so, but then apparently he signed recently an executive order saying that we're going to create a group to decide like how, and I'm just going, same thing. I'm like, just give them effing money. Like if you're trying to play this game and you could just make it happen, then if you really wanted to immediately help them, you would just give them money today. But instead it's an executive order that's like, we're going to talk about, but maybe it'll end up in a net positive over the top of that. That's certainly possible, but it's weird the way these things keep happening. But we can go all day on things like that.
There's so many.
But I just think it's an interesting one in that same regard, that instead of doing it immediately, like you're saying, it went a different direction. I just be on guard for those things. And I think what we're seeing a lot of is this kind of stuff that I want to
just to put this really, simply out there, is Trump is one person, and I mean, he's not a dictator. He should not have total control. But he might not, there's a lot of things he might not be aware of. I mean, like you and I are in this information space. No, I mean, people say, oh, I'm sure, but really, like, I find this is what I do all day, and I have a very hard time keeping up with everything. Totally. He has to keep up with way more than I do. And I don't know that, but my point is not to give him a path. So instead of immediately assuming the worth, it should be, let's bring this to his awareness if we can. Like,
I say instead of assuming at all. And that's the point. It's not, we don't assume on either side of it. I see what happens with those kind of things, though, is there tends to be a partisan interest in kind of giving the benefit of the doubt only when it interests him. You know what I mean? And that's what happens a lot on both sides. And so my problem is that it's like, okay, in any moment you're starting to go, well, there might be, stop. Right? We deal with facts. We deal with what we can prove. But and that's it.
Well, yeah, but just to that point, though, because if we don't know, instead of just assuming, okay, we should, I actually think we should give them the benefit of the doubt, because the benefit of the doubt leads to potential action.
No, I mean, I don't ever think that. I mean, you do the same thing, just don't assume that he might know something. Just leave out the assumption part. Go after him and say, we still want this to be finished. I hope you're doing it the right way. We'll wait to make that conclusion until we see the outcome. That's all I want to see with everybody.
Well, I want people to be making things aware. And I just do that so that they know, because I don't know what he knows, what he doesn't know, what he thinks is priority. Right. I certainly don't. So, but I think that
he also does have a huge team of people, though, that are constantly working towards that exact end.
Yeah, but he's also got a lot of gatekeepers.
Exactly my point.
Exactly my point. So that's why I think it's incumbent upon us.
He should get the benefit of the doubt when those people are around him that he put there. That's what I think.
I think the point stands that regardless, if you see something that you're concerned about, it should be voiced, and we should be trying to make that voice as loud and as heard as possible.
Right.
And the same thing for the good things. We want them to know, like, the people appreciate this. We want to see more of this.
Yeah.
And I think on both sides.
Totally. I mean, that's the point in general, is that no matter, we do all of that without, I think nobody in politics, again, like the point we made in the beginning, whether they're right, they're lying, or they're being tricked, we just don't give them the benefit of the doubt. We wait for outcome, right? We say, this is what we want. This is not what you promised. Certainly possible that you didn't do that on purpose, but it doesn't change anything for me, right? That's all. I'm really, we all do it. I do it too. We all fall in these moments where we have our personal opinion that overlaps with it, but I think we just strive in the interest, in the direction of erring on the outcome, principles. That's it. Because I think this is how they play us, as we often talk about, they play us from our personal or emotional, what we want to see, and I'll make some of those points here. Like, there's some things like this that I keep seeing that, and this is my opinion. I mean, look, I think it's pretty obvious that my opinion is that Elon Musk is a central part of all of this.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's quite, especially right now with the Trump administration rolling this out, And again, you could certainly argue that Trump might not know he's doing this, but again, it's irrelevant to what happens. Ellison and Oracle, this COVID-19. I mean, these people are the deep state. If we're going to be really clear about what we think the deep state is, they represent the most obvious example of those
Elon
things.
Musk is literally instrumental in fomenting every aspect of the fourth industrial revolution.
Exactly.
I just did a show laying out. So I know most people, I'm sure this audience, is familiar with the fourth industrial revolution, which was, the book that Klaus Schwab wrote, and the WEF claims they coined the term. But actually, these so-called experts believe we're already in the fifth industrial revolution.
Of course.
And they've actually mapped out the sixth and seventh already. Yeah. So they're talking about, sometimes they call it like industry 6.0, industry 7.0, but it's the same thing. They go by both terms.
So they're treating us like some kind of tech update on a phone.
Yeah, no, but that's literally what this is about. And
Right.
just to point out how deceptive all of this is, they keep saying it's human-centered. Well, of course it's human-centered. Somebody has to program the technology. And what they mean by human-centered is that you are going to have a digital agent. They talk about digital twins, but this is kind of like, it can be a digital twin, but it's also your digital agent, and they extract from human, which is so interesting because when they talk about game B, they say game A is extractive and exploitative.
Yeah.
However, game B is not. It's non-rivalrous. However, they're going to take the technology from game B. I'm like, so you're going to extract from game A? Okay. And they talk about literally exploiting from game A.
Right. So step one, step two, basically, we're exploiting everything from you. Now we're utilizing it in the new
and then
version.
We're calling you the extractors and exploiters.
Gosh, I mean, it's just so it's unnerving to think about, these people. But so I think that the larger thing is it's clear that these people are playing a role, and it seems we agree on that.
Yeah.
That basically is.
Yeah,
watered
he's the
down.
free speech savior.
Right, exactly. But so this is what I jokingly said. So he shares this, and look, my opinion is clear that right now globalism is the thing. We're just not calling it that,
Right?
Right,
Yeah.
Clearly, and all the people who we're talking about, who spent their careers calling these out, are suddenly pulling punches and screaming about how everyone's saving free speech and talking about pedophiles in Europe and things that are in many cases real and important to talk about,
Right.
but deviating us. And so I just think it's funny. And I mean, there are all these examples, and whether it's Israel, there's all these different elements that play into what I think is this obvious technocratic globalist kind of rollout. And he says globalism is civilization suicide, and just shares this meme. I'm just thinking, is that as easy? Is that as simple as it goes? It's like I just said, clearly, since Elon shared this meme, he's totally not part of the obvious globalist technocratic agenda he's currently central part of. Case closed. I think that's a lot of what we're seeing. Like this lazy kind of people go, oh, well, he's fighting it. So,
What I think is, I haven't actually seen this meme. And what I find so fascinating about this is, I've always thought he's kind of part of the, dark MAGA. Like he's clearly a Hegelian operative.
Yeah.
But and that doesn't mean that I don't support some things he's done. I'm glad he's not that X is like a free speech, but it's more, you can say more there, at least for now.
What that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything
whatever.
that I could point out that he's done that I would argue is a net positive. But go ahead.
Okay. Well,
I mean, you could get into specifics around the companies, but we could argue about whether he's actually running those companies. And I think there's a whole conversation around what he really is. But that's
we could do a whole show just on Elon.
I argue we probably agree on a lot more than we don't.
Yeah, exactly. I think so. I'm not an Elon fan. I've done countless hours talking about why I think Elon is problematic and a false hero.
Yeah.
But what I think is super interesting just about this is it's not that what he used at the top says Western nations, and he's the water, he's putting out the fire, killing the globalism essentially. Or you could read another.
No. I think he's growing the plant. That's what he's saying. Western nations growing globalism, which will eventually hang you, is the point. That's what for the podcast. And so what I think you were getting at is that it's interesting that he's basically telling us that Western, which is us, are growing globalism that will eventually, which is kind of what we're saying, but he's the one with the water in his hand.
He is, right. So he's watering the plant, right?
Yeah.
So here's what's so interesting is that it is Western nations, and this is what the people, the quote unquote futurists talked about. They said it was going to be the East and the West that would be pitted against each other to have the technocracy emerge. And he's feeding into that by saying we're, essentially the problem that's growing the.
Yeah. Right. I mean, that's funny.
So the East is going to be the solution, right? And they're already talking. The globalists are using a lot of the East as a model. I'm not saying that that the East is all of the problem. That's not what I'm saying. But when you look at the AI world society, they talk about a social value reward system, and they claim it's different than China's social credit system. They've clearly used it as a model. So I just think it's really interesting that he's talking about Western nations, because he's feeding into this dialectical narrative that they say of their own words is going to pave the way for the technocratic regime.
And we also talk about this in a lot in the historical, like a lot of different senses, that this is, the revelation, like basically showing you that we're doing this,
right?
But not letting you know that, like, subconsciously. But then he posted it, therefore, like he didn't say we all fight, like he just basically said this.
Right.
And they go, oh, because he's fighting it. Like, that's the assumption you lay over the top of it. I just think that's happening everywhere right now. I just laugh because it's as simple as that.
He literally says, so he's got like a bunch of these tweets. I wish I could pull them up, but like one where he talks about like, for the record, I am a socialist.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he says that. And
he checks every single box of everything they've ever fought.
And then he like goes under, he's like, but not this kind. And then
the good guy version.
Yeah, the good guy version. Well, then he talks about, creating the, conscious collective.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, he's talking about building the noosphere. He said he wants to make it WeChat but better. So
yeah, I mean, guys, it's like, my God, like the funny thing is, that's the joke, the running joke. It's just like every single box that you checked that you were all fighting, we all were. He is rolling out, but it's the good AI, right?
Yeah.
So, but he's fighting OpenAI and Sam Altman, but he's not really, seeing as how he's literally working on these projects with Palantir and Anduril, and I think it's all a big theater show. I mean, that's a whole bigger topic.
Well, that was one of the first things that happened too, was that whole I forgot what it's called, but with Anduril and Palantir,
the consortium, which is still ongoing as of January 23rd.
That's
I last checked.
It was right before Stargate rolled out,
right? Let's not forget, Elon was involved with the company starting. He put up over $1 billion for it, and then they had this weird falling out. Apparently, is that really what happened? I mean, I just want to point about everything. For me, it's about facts and outcome.
Mm-hmm.
All the narrative in between can get us so discombobulated that we don't know what's going on. And so I think it's clear that we see the connection there. We see him roll out. We can see DARPA's connection to OpenAI and all of it. DARPA's connection to XAI. Yeah. I mean, I just think we're being trained into this. I think it all comes together. Like the thing with Trump, and like, are we really pretending that Elon Musk, who's like his next door buddy, doesn't know he's going to roll this out when AI is Elon's thing? When, it doesn't make any sense to me. And then Trump, like at the same time, Elon has this weird back and forth with Sam Altman, like the day of, and Trump introduces Sam Altman as like the leading guy in AI. I mean, it just seems such a weird thing. Like Elon Musk has been in his ear about this. I don't know. To me, it seems like they're trying to make it look as if there's division when there's not. But
they do that a lot.
Outcome is all that I care about. So when it happens, we'll point stuff out. But right now, it all rolls out. I just think it's very concerning, as you're highlighting.
Yes.
And here is some other examples like that. This is, I just think stuff like this, where Jones is going, Trump administration's recruited the king of pedophile hunters. And it's like, that kind of stuff, I think, is what, I just said, this is all in hopes that you stop calling out Trump's great reset. This is what I think. I said, apparently all you have to do is yell pedophile and Democrat, and some will forget everything else that just happened. And I said, and that's not to say that what they're pointing at is necessarily false. Just in a general point, I'm seeing a lot of these kind of H-1B conversation, and Elon just goes on a weak rant about Europe, and it just seems like a very contrived look over there.
I think that was such a psyop to try and to sow division.
This one, same thing. Rabbit, it says, be wary of the censors. And it says, how do you tell who's telling the truth? The ones who's trying to silence the other people are the ones lying. And he goes, exactly. And I said, exactly. It's like, my point being, obviously I'm not agreeing with him. That's the point that he is literally doing. Here's an example of who used to support him, by the way, Dr. Anastasia Maria Lopez, because has had her account like nuked. And she's showing the results and everything. Like, it just went down to 0. And she was a pretty influential account. I mean, she's got over 1.4 million followers.
Whoa.
See what I'm saying? And look at this. And she's proving it. And so she went against him at this H-1B thing. And ever since, it's been gone. And so, it's funny to me that they're going, all he has to do is float the meme out that says that's the thing. And they go, that is because he's fighting it. That's the kind of lazy mentality we're seeing. Account suspensions have actually tripled on Twitter since he took over. And this is not because Fortune says it. It's easily provable. I find that really interesting. And then this is another last one on this kind of segment. This one says, learn how the globalist deep state's massive targeting of Elon Musk is designed to derail Trump's plan. I just said, right. So don't fight back, guys. Even if it looks exactly like what you're supposed to fight, because that'll derail Trump's super secret master plan. Yeah. Sort of like daring to keep your phone on after a plane takes off, because it'll derail the plane.
And I know, I know, like, you've never been a fan of Alex, but regardless of what you think of Alex, it's so obvious that Elon's his boss currently.
I think so too. I mean, it's not that I'm not a fan of Alex Jones. I just think that he represents right now an objective, like, look, if we can't watch we don't have to get into it, but like the drone conversation or what happened up to the inauguration. I did a whole segment where I'm like, look at this. Every single day, 7 times a day, he was telling us there was going to be a false flag, violence, not like maybe be careful, but like, here's 4 people telling you they had a prophecy. It's coming. It's happening. It's happening. And then the day of, he was like, whoa, everybody calm down. I don't think there's anything that's going to happen. And it's dishonest. And I think it's important because he has a huge audience, one of the largest, and he's funneling people in to blindly accept what he has been pretending to fight. That's how I feel about it. But it's completely my opinion. I just think it behooves us to be careful with stuff like that. That's why we're saying question us too.
Well, Elon was going to bail him out with the lawsuit. I just think he's got like a noose around his neck. So what I always say with this kind of stuff, and I know I've said it, with you before and here, but I say it all the time because it really bears repeating. But if people spend as much time adjudicating the information directly, the information, as they do glorifying and vilifying sources, we'd be in a totally different. So regardless of whether or not, I think, you take it with a grain of salt, the information. That doesn't mean he's not providing good information. It's just that people have created cult of personality. So it's like, there's the hero, everything they say is true, or here's the villain, everything they say is false. And that's even people with the best of intentions or the worst of intentions. A broken clock is right twice a day. So you just really
usually
need to take
the best lies are using truth, right?
Exactly. I say that all the time. They weaponize the truth. It's like, why are they telling you this now? Why is this being specifically curated, and which part of the truth are they omitting? Why do they want you to know this now?
So in that very context, though, I'm sure you would also agree that there's times in moments of very, political heat that it's important to highlight the person doing that. And I think that's all I'm trying to do here. Is that's why I have 4.5 hours of show and I spend 5 minutes breaking down, look at this way, and then spend 4.5 hours highlighting the facts around the topic that are being misrepresented. But I totally get your point. And there's plenty arguing that this is in its own right. Like, I shouldn't waste my time talking about that, but I think it's important. Like, I haven't spent my entire career making it about highlighting people, but recently, which this is my logic on it, is I think we all notice something weird's happening right now. It's very clear that this is coming to a boiling point. And so I see a lot of people who, it's the same point with like the MAGA rally. And it's not just unique to the right, guys. It's right now that the right is the leading party putting it forward. I see just as many Democrats that were blinded during Biden and everything else too, fighting for COVID-19. The point is that I see a lot of really good people who, if we could actually get momentum behind this in the same direct, like we actually all fought for what we believe we're fighting for, as opposed to fighting for the right thing, but with the wrong person who's leading in the wrong direction, we could really see positive change. I genuinely think that. But right now, I think there's a lot of people, it's not just him, he's just a central part of it, that are driving people into the ground. Like literally, like the one I was going to show next is like the North American Union point. Right?
I mean, quite a bit about this.
It's huge. I mean, look, right now, and we don't have to get all into this, but the idea that Trump just said recently that he could send U.S. special operators after Mexican drug cartels, like that's not, Mexico doesn't want this. So you're sending in military. They
actually rejected the deal.
It's crazy, right? And so this is imperialism, naked imperialism. And you could argue this might be not what he means by it, but you're still talking about like, we don't care about, what about national borders? Didn't we all just spend time talking about that? Or this is a new one too. This Attorney General Andrew Bailey for Missouri. We're demanding $25 billion in penalties from China, what they did in COVID-19, even though the U.S. was a central part in it too. And if they don't pay up, we'll seize Chinese assets like farmland, which he could mean in the U.S. Obviously, I think that's what he means, but he didn't say that. My point is that you're still talking about some very authoritarian type action in all of this, but the bigger points are Greenland and Panama, and so what are your thoughts on that? That's a pretty alarming.
I have multiple thoughts. So firstly, we have to look at the obvious history. There's the technate that, of course, Elon Musk's grandfather was involved in, and Josh Hadelman, I might be pronouncing his name wrong, but in Canada, he was the head of Technocracy Inc. I believe it was from 1936 to 1943. And of course, they proposed that there would be the technate and it would be this North America region. There is also the document from the Club of Rome. This was 1973. This was the regionalized and adaptive global systems document. And it literally creates these regions, 10 regions, regionalized and adaptive.
On that, just real quick, here is the actual picture of, it's like the New World Order map you can see on the show. But then this one was the actual Sustainable Development Goals. Slightly different with Mexico below, but it's the same dynamic, right? It's the blocks breaking
the power blocks. And there is also, of course, I keep bringing up both Kissinger and Brzezinski, and they're not the only ones. I think Jacques Attali, and there's a lot of these. Again, the futurists, they had the gnosis, the ascended masters gave them. But they talked about how there'd be a dissolution of nation states, and there would be remnants of these power blocks, these that would create these hegemonic battles. And oftentimes they do talk about the hegemonic battle between the East and the West for the technocracy to emerge.
We don't have to get into all this today, but we have to include how that is a central part of Israel's Zionist perspective on this too. And I think the overlap is very clear. But
I think that conversation, I know we very much disagree on a lot of elements of it. I think that conversation is so nuanced, and there's been so much heightened emotionality around it that people are not capable of seeing the nuance.
That's but just politics, in my opinion. But,
sure. But now you've got religion too. So
exactly the point.
So it's not just
that's
politics.
Why I always talk about how the two shouldn't be intertwined.
I actually did a really long show with Matt Arrett the other night. I haven't released it yet, but we talked quite a bit because the whole beginning of his book is actually on this topic. And we do talk about it, and we actually are very aligned on this. I do see it as the problem. A lot of people think about it being the greater Israel, and they think it's all about the Jews, when in my opinion, this is about greater Babylon, and it kind of has the same outline as greater Babylon. We can address that another time, because there's a lot of nuances within that.
The point, I mean, I would hope my audience is well aware. I mean, the whole point is this is about a Zionist political organization that abuses both Christians and Jewish people, and not Jews alone, Israelis alone, Christians alone. That's the thing. And so the misrepresentation of trying to make it about only Jewish people is kind of the ploy.
The problem is a lot of people have, unfortunately, we do live in a society that did not have a great education. They don't know history. And we live in a soundbite world. So what has happened is a lot of people, hear sound bites of this conversation and immediately have extrapolated that to mean the Jews are responsible for all the evil in the world. And they've been scope-gated. Yeah, right. That is the agenda.
I quite frankly think that is the Zionist ADL type agenda, like driving that mentality.
Well, they have to have that in order to create the justification for what they're doing.
Exactly. I mean, we're on the same page with this. I actually don't think we disagree as much as you might think, but I think that the reality of it is that all I was taking there is how whatever the reality of it is, I'm just saying the mindset that they're openly projecting is right in line with all of this, right? Sure. I mean, that's important, because I think the technocratic, New World Order globalist is all of this. Like this is the coming together of all of it.
They want to create a cyber state, and I think, I don't even like to use the word Zionist. Not that I'm saying it's already been put there, in the 1800s. I'm not saying that that's incorrect. It's just that
they call themselves Zionists. That's what
I know. That's what I'm saying. The term, literally, the journalist in 1879, I believe it was, Mar was his last name, coined the term. So it's out there. I don't like to use it because it's so politically and emotionally charged, and I think people misinterpret what that actually means. So I don't talk about it in those terms.
That's interesting, though. I would argue that we would both argue in other contexts that it's important to tell the truth and say what's correct.
Well, I acknowledge what it is. I acknowledge what it is. But when I lay things out, I like to really give the full context.
Totally.
So that people aren't just,
that's why your work is important, because you take the time to get into the details. And a lot of people don't do that.
Yeah. So thank you. Where did I go with all?
Well,
with these regionalized. No, that's okay. That's okay. I do see the overlap. I just really think the nuance is so important because.
I will say one last thing. This never been a more important time to make sure we're clear on that nuance.
Yeah.
Like, this is what Matt and I have talked about this as well. Like, it's a very central part of the conversation that is problematic, because it is being used to drive forward a lot of really bad things under the guise. And in the same way, people that even think they're fighting it end up in the same agenda. And my audience is well aware. I've been bringing this bell from the very beginning.
It's and I just think it's really evil. It's like hard for me to even wrap my head around it on all sides. But to talk about this, these regional blocks that they're creating, and to go back to, so I outlined Kissinger and Brzezinski used it also. But here's what I will say. There is the possibility, just to provide a glimmer of hope. I'm not saying this is what's going to happen, but there is the other possibility. And I've talked to Canadians in particular. I haven't talked to, the Danish or people who live in Greenland about this, but I've seen some threads though. I don't know them personally.
I get the sense from what I can tell, but you're right. It's hard to see. None of them want a part of any of this.
No, I've actually seen the people from Greenland actually really do want it.
I just mean, I've seen these conversations, but the best I can tell, and it's hard. How do we know for sure? Because polls can lie.
So that's what I'm saying. With the Canadians, I've actually talked to them, and a lot of them do want it if it means they will be part of a true Republican.
I just don't know if I agree with that. But again, how we would possibly know? I just think I get a lot of sense that I don't think most Canadians that I've talked to are like, this is what Trump is saying it is, or why they would need. Like, it seems almost like, for example, if Trudeau, or whatever it was, let's just not try to make it about current politics because that overlaps. A Canadian government that, let's say, was doing what you thought was well, just suddenly said, America, come join us because we'll make it all better for you. Wouldn't most Americans be like, well, even if that's the case, that's pretty anti-American? Like, I get that same sense that's what a lot of Canadians
that's actually not what I'm hearing from a lot of Canadians. So
what you have,
so that's what I'm saying. I can only discern from what I'm reading from people in Greenland, and I have actually seen a lot of them support this. They really do want it. They don't
through
want
a lot
to
of Republican channels, I would argue, making that case.
But maybe. But they're not Republican.
I'm just making a joke. It's impossible to tell. Is my point.
I know the algorithms feed. But this is what I'm saying. I obviously have laid out the very grim historical documentation that points in one direction. I'm just saying there is an alternative possibility. And I think we can't dispute and discount that possibility because we should advocate for things we want to see.
Yeah.
And there is the possibility that if there are people who actually want to restore a constitutional republic and that we were to expand, then we are taking them out of, especially Canada, out of a monarchical system that is imperial.
Fair.
And that they would be now. But now what I've heard from a lot of Canadians is that there's in Canada, you have, much like you do here with, the left, right, kind of the blue cities and the red states, you've got this. So there, they very much got kind of like the East and the West, and a lot of Western Canada is much more, what we would call Republican-minded. They want to see some sort of representative, like a republic kind of structure created. At the time, they even actually, were vying to have some sort of a restructuring of their government. So, you're seeing there are people with that mindset. There are a lot of people in Canada who are under a very conditioned monarchical kind of programming. They want to see that continue. They don't want to have a representative constitutional republic.
I say it's minority, though. I get the sense anyway.
Yeah. I see a lot of people who are, they just don't have that freedom. So I have this theory, I think I've shared this with you before, but this theory that it's being bred out of us constantly. But I actually think, so I have this theory, there's a risk-taking gene. It's the RDR4 with the 7th allele.
Oh, interesting. Like genetically?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
They often apply it to like financial risk-taking, but it does span a broader scope.
I don't even know if
you believe in genetics.
Yeah, like the whole thing seems so wild, but I'm not an expert.
When we get to Stargate, we can talk about metagenomics and we can go there.
Yeah.
But let's say you just hypothetically believe that. But then theoretically, we should be a population that has a higher percentage of that risk-taking gene, which I think they are trying to very aggressively breed out of us. But I think a lot of other nations they don't have that mindset. And you could say it's just conditioning, maybe it's just that they aren't wired that way. So I think there's both possibilities. Obviously the historical trajectory and blueprints lean more towards them creating this dissolution of nation states for regional power blocks. And
I think that's the most important, is that the big hinging question is whether or not that's even the objective of what Trump and whoever is rolling out. Like constitutionally minded, that's the statement. Right. So it all comes down to that, first of all, if whether them joining even means they're going to gain it. Like, not that I support Bernie Sanders or literally anybody in government, but he made a fair point today going, well, Trump said in a recent clip that they'll have better healthcare. And I think that's objectively not true in a lot of different ways. Like you can show a lot of these differences, at least what they're used to.
I think but again, true.
But it comes down to what this is the interesting thing, is if you look at what Canadians are asking for, is that what they actually want? There's a difference between what they think they have and whether some of them would prefer some kind of state-controlled healthcare versus something else. And so, again, same point. Is that what we think is best for them?
I think all healthcare is going down the tubes if we go in this direction. But
but the last thing on it too is the idea that I think what's also important is that let's just say that's what Canadians wanted. Okay, I agree. If we're going to be in a world where we argue that we believe in representative government, whatever that looks like today, that they all collectively, and we could somehow prove that, which is also a big caveat, decided they wanted to do that, I would say, well, okay, fine, that's what they collectively want. But if we're going to be in that world, well, then let's argue that we shouldn't allow the U.S. to dictate and move around Taiwan the way they want to, or acknowledge that Crimea and the Donbass have very, very provably openly voted to do the things that they won't acknowledge. So it's a given if they do that when they want to. So it's about consistency. So I just think the way it's being played in a world where we can see that they don't care about those things, it's, I think, pretty clearly a manipulation. But I agree with your points, though. If and when, then we should allow that. But I think it's globalism. I think it is expansionism. I think it is imperialism.
Yeah.
Well, I think, would you agree? I got a little pushback on this. imperialism is one part is overlapped in many ways with the idea of globalism, because you have a cultural.
Yeah, that's how you get globalism.
Well, good. I'm glad you agree with that. But people push back like, no, it's about the culture. I'm like, guys, just look up the word. It's about both. Like you're conquering territory, you're spreading your cultural. It's about one world government, essentially, one control faction.
Yeah, it's just that you have battles of ego that come into play rather than it just all being a part of one vision of unity and harmony.
Right. Well, but conquering territory could lead to the same endpoint is the idea.
No, that's what I'm saying. It is the same thing. I always make this point with like the communists and the fascists. Like, it's not that Hitler was opposed ideologically to Marxism. It's that he wanted to rule the world. He wanted Germany to be the entire world, and he wanted to be the ruler. It was a battle of men. Not that he really disagreed ideologically with Stalin, and said he didn't want Stalin to rule the world.
I think historically there's a lot of that. Like we tend to put this one narrative over certain things, and let's also not forget that there's the same influential families that are currently influencing the U.S. today. We're playing both sides of that, just like that too. Same with the current, at the time, the current government as well. There's all sorts of weird overlaps. But so this thing where it goes is concerning, because obviously what we started here is that the everything that we've all been worried about is rolling out in front of us, and it seems a lot of people don't really want to acknowledge it. Right? Would you agree with that? I think it's pretty alarming how clearly some of this continues to roll out.
Yeah, I think some people don't. I do think there are people who do. I think that we need to hold both sides, like really encourage the good things and scream that we don't want the bad thing.
Blindly go all bad because Trump, and don't blindly say all good because Trump. Don't same with Biden, or whatever it is. I think that's how we always, and we're always.
It should be about policies and principles,
of course, and outcome, right? And this is the thing today is that, and I referenced this. I recently went over a study. There's been a lot of studies now that have come out and been like, look, like it's objectively clear that what they last say is what pretty much rules the day, not even the outcome. Because, it's like, well, they wouldn't let him do it, or he changed his mind. It's like, well, you still give him credit for saying the thing. And that's what we all see keeps happening. It's kind of crazy. It's like he comes out and yells the right words, and they ignore that it didn't happen, or that, it's like, that's the problem. And I mean, again, it's not, I hate that we always have to do that, because when I say those things, people make it in the context of one side. It's not. To my mind, it's our government, or just government in a general sense. But let's get into the mRNA part, because we've already been going for about an hour so far. So let's talk about mRNA aspect of the Stargate point, and then we could talk about the artificial intelligence part. One thing I thought was really interesting in this is that ultimately the mRNA platform direction is something that is based on the idea of the gain of function experimentation that led to this day, the protein manipulation. That's what ultimately is the basis for. And so I think what's interesting is that this is kind of folding these 2 points together. This came out in the same way, is that they're now going, and you might have seen it. I actually think this was kind of reactionary, that Trump signed a executive order halting gain of function. But there's a few ways I saw that, because again, that's one of those points you would say, well, yes, that does seem to be a positive step, but didn't they rename it to EPPP research? And so it's like,
I saw that.
That's weird, right? So maybe he made a mistake, or maybe that's, who knows? But then secondarily, I'm like, guys, I just said this, it never ceases to amaze me how easily it is to manipulate partisan support, either side of it. I said, this is what the mRNA project is, right? Like, that's what we're talking about. So if he writes this order that says he stops it, but we're rolling out cancer mRNA shots, I'm worried that's just a way to get you to think it didn't happen when it is still happening. What are your thoughts on that? And let's get into what the mRNA side of this is in general. I mean, the fact that we're rolling out an mRNA anything on day 2 is pretty wild.
Yeah, well, I mean, it does. I did see that with the EPP, and it does look like they're just renaming it.
Well, that was a while ago. Fauci tried to play that, right? And so it's like, why wouldn't he have written that down? It's like, I think, because I get it, that was a lie, right? He tried to pretend it, but technically on the record, that's still what is listed as now. Yeah. So that, legally speaking, if an executive order would even apply at all in this case, my same point, but it wouldn't apply, I would argue, which would be, interesting.
Yeah, I do. But then I also think this ties right into Stargate, because the MTX is a part of the company. The company, it's Metagenomics. And that's what they do, is genetic manipulation. They talk about how they're using CRISPR technology, and they talk about RNA, like restructuring. And I mean, it's right on their website. I think I have like the list of what they do, but they're a genetic engineering company. Yeah. And so they're claiming they're banning any kind of like genetic modification and good, well, no, not MTX, but now,
I mean, it's saying it's good. I just don't think it's happening.
No, they're saying it. I think that's great, and that they're not going to do mRNA. But then what they're saying is they're not going to inject or they're going to tell us that they're not injecting those technologies, but literally they're going to use AI to do it. Is what it sounds like.
Right. Well, but I mean, you could argue that we're I don't trust any of it. But just because they even write that order doesn't make me feel they're going to stop. I don't trust any of this, any side of it. But let's just say hypothetically it was going to. Does that even still amount to what we think it does? That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Like now it seems that they're going to, like my point was maybe they've already reached what they wanted to accomplish with that. And so it's like, fine, put that aside. But we're still using the fruit of that, the project. That's what worries me.
Well, I mean, there are many ways you could go with this because there's there's the whole theory that the, shots were some sort of like nanobot technology.
I mean, at this point, it's fair to say a theory, but look, what's interesting is I've seen so much evidence. First, just with the idea of like just the lipid nanoparticles, not technically nanotechnology. Well, it is but not a robot is what the argument is, but still, I've seen so much since then that I don't know how much, like the idea that my point is somebody puts out a what's the word? I can't remember the word now. The special kind of microscope they use.
Electromicroscopy.
Microscopy. That's what it is. Yeah. And so basically that they show these that was super like, nanoscale microscopes, and that they're showing these things. My point is like, well, how do I like verify that? Like, how do I know?
Well, it's illegal to have electron microscopes.
Outside. Yeah. But so what's interesting though, is that you're so many of those. Shows Health Defense has been showing it. And I'm talking like weird things, but on top of that, you can see all these anomalies. Look at what all that happened and look at the different overlaps, the optogenetics, the magogenetics, or the simple idea that this is exactly what they've been working on for so long. And it's like, I guess my point is, I don't know if I say that anymore.
So my theory is that they're doing a lot of beta testing, and I don't know for sure one way or the other, but I think that they're trying to figure out what will be the most effective and efficient. So I think that
testing on us as usual.
So I really think we're under like this mass scale experiment where some of it is
that's what I was going to say.
Nanotechnology, some of it is optogenetic.
So each different groups got different types of vaccines,
and
with
then some of them got saline.
I would agree. That's kind of where my mind has ended up, where it's like I don't know how we can dismiss that.
That's my theory. I can't prove that, but that is kind of what I lean towards. But here's the other thing: is that I actually think this whole conversation about the nanobots is used to. The reason they're trying to make it so specific and detailed and elaborate is to try and discredit because that was the pushback that I kept getting. Well, that's crazy that you're even looking at that. Like that's just. This crazy conspiracy theory. But what they're doing with this Stargate, I mean, is literally using AI. They've laid out in the AI World Society. They have this whole, I have a whole, I will do a show on it, but all these notes on there's Project Salus and then there was where they were doing during COVID, the W bands where they're literally the wireless body area network.
We talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's all these tests that actually were done that we have provable documentation on. So I just think that there's like a lot of I think where people part of why it's been effective to try and discredit the people who are calling these things out is I don't think the technology has been fully manifested. I don't think they're fully there. And I think they're still in all of these kind of like experimental phases, trying to figure out what's going to be the most effective, most efficient, and also doing these like compliance tests. They said that they admitted that it was a compliance test. So they're trying to figure out how much of the population will actually opt in. How much do we have to control remotely?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's a fair point. And this is something that I respect in my coverage on this is that some people argue that this is more of like a red herring or like that they're maybe faking until they make it kind of thing. Like they're showing, but I don't know. I've come across far too much at this point. Either they're aggressively selling you with patents and videos and old companies with the idea that they've been doing it, which is certainly possible. But I'm at the point where it's hard. Like this is a patent, like we talked about.
Yeah.
But back to that point, the only honest way to cover this, like we always have, is that a patent doesn't prove that it's happening, but a patent is still important. A patent means something, right? So here it is, the patent that goes all the way to 2037 from Wells Fargo. And it literally is called Micro Electromechanical Systems, MEMS, or i.e. smart dust. And I swear to God, this thing it's from 2016. It's talking about spitting out smart dust at an ATM to be able to verify who you are.
Yep.
And so these things are everywhere. And so I'm of the mind, and I'll even just include this since I did this show a while back. And this is what I think. This is what we were just talking about, is that the title was Is smart dust already in use in the population, and was COVID-19 an attempted experimental next step? I think we can easily prove with their own data that this has been going on for a very long time. And so I'm with you on that. I think what we're dealing with now is that overlap of how, I mean, everything he's talking about, like the way they can use the AI system. What do you think the AI is going to read your skin? Like, how do you think that's going to work? There's going to be something internally that has to relay the bioinformation. They can read
your skin. They're already doing that, but what they want is to be able to control you, remote control you from within. And they can do that with biosensors that are inside you.
Well, that's this one too. This is the ferret nanoparticle conversation we've talked about. Like one of the ways that happens. My point was not, I know AI can scan you. What I'm saying is to be able to do what he's talking about, to have like the internal blood cancer stuff, that needs to be in, that is what I was highlighting this for. That's the Internet of nano things, Internet of bio nano things. That's where we are. And it shows here like this, you know, it's not just the computer. Make sure we're showing it. It's like nanotechnology in your blood that can relay information. So
the other thing with all of this, and this is the thing I was super concerned about, and now they're doing this this kind of switch. So this is exactly to your point when you're talking about like, look at the good guys over here. This is, and then they end up rolling out, or they end up feigning that they're against something that they've actually ushered in.
Right.
So with Maha, the Maha platform, I've been saying there's a lot of things I really like about Maha. I mean, I personally have a seed oil allergy. I would love nothing more than to see it banned. I mean, World War II artillery grease does not belong in your food. I mean, that's great. I hope they do that.
Did you see the, unfortunately, did you see the appointment?
What?
Did you see the appointment?
I did.
Okay,
yeah, that's the lobbyists for seed oil, of course.
That's the worst thing. I mean, I figured when I saw that, I'm like, oh my God, you are going to have a field day with this. You know, that's not Maha, clearly. And I haven't seen much from RFK Jr., so I'm kind of worried about how that goes forward. But
so I mean, there's that. You know, he's talking about like the pesticides and glyphosate. Yes, please. I mean, the EU has been well ahead of us on that. I think they allow 3 endocrine disruptors. We allow something like 1,800.
Oh God.
I mean, it's insane. It's like everywhere. This is just, it should be a national security threat. Like they're literally poisoning us.
Ask Mexico with their corn. I mean, there's a whole thing right now where they're going F off with your GMO corn, and they're like forcing it on them anyway. Derek was covering that.
Oh yeah.
These things are basically bioweapons if you want to break it down with what we're talking about. It's the same overlapping game. You know?
So others to say that, you know, there's some things that I really like about the Maha platform, and the seed oil lobbyist being appointed is not, you know, encouraging. But hopefully, I think we should still be saying yes. Let's go forward.
Totally
ban the seed oils. You know,
while
make
being
America
critical
healthy.
Of every bad step that happens. Right?
Acknowledge that, like, you know, his right hand girl is Nicole Shanahan. Like, you know, but all that to say that the thing I kept screaming about when people were like rah rah Maha, I was like, yeah, but RFK has been this huge advocate for precision health medicine.
Right.
And so there's actually, and now they're saying, no, the Maha group is saying they're against precision health. And even Nicole Shanahan came out against it. But it goes all the way back to Obama. And I actually pulled out this document from the Obama White House archives where they talk about this precision health. And it is literally what they're talking about with this mRNA cancer stuff, where they're going to have all these biosensors. And that document is actually super scary because it not only talks about, like, you know, the internet of, you know, bodies and internet of nano things, but they also talk about like a lot of the cognitive brainwashing that they're going to be doing in order to get people on board with this.
Well, if you're looking for that, this is just a 20-second clip. Go ahead and grab, if you're looking for something, I'll play this. So this is something I played in the past. It's just a quick little part of it. The whole thing I played many times, but this is the clip going back over 20 years now, I think, from it's a 10-year-old conference. He's discussing technology that's now over 20 years old, and that's smart dust. And on top of that, we played a lot from Dr. James Giordano, who's all about the neuroscience conversation. And he claims during COVID-19, they already rolled this stuff out. He said that on an open conversation. And so that's what we're talking about, what you're getting into, which overlaps with that point I was just highlighting here. And this is only one of the different ways this works. I mean, this is the ferret nanoparticle injections. This is the one back, and I covered this article, the show was on the May 2023, and they were already testing the mRNA ferret nanoparticle injection, and that overlaps with this, which I'm sure my audience has seen. Even Guardian wrote this, 8 years old, genetically engineered magneto protein remotely controls brain and behavior.
We talked about this.
We did. And here's even the Rockefeller talking about it the next year. The Rockefeller, and they call it flipping a switch inside the head. With new technology, science are able to exert wireless control over brain cells of mice. In this, they tell you they can control them remotely, that they can even relay visual data from their eyes back. I mean, this is what we're talking about today, right?
Yeah.
And so this goes back to Charles Lieber, Bob Langer as the co-founder of Moderna. I mean, all of this comes together. We've talked about this so much. And so I think that the problem here, I was gonna play this clip. All of it comes together in the idea that this stuff is literally being used right now to potentially, as Catherine Austin Fitz would argue, manipulate the way you feel and act about things. But simply the idea is that they can surveil you, which I think is internally, and it gets crazy.
Well, and before you play this clip, I'll just say that there's also, so I know I talked quite a bit, I think last time, about Barbara Marx Hubbard, and she's behind HeartMath. And so a lot of people are familiar with HeartMath as like kind of this app that helps you with biofeedback and, you know, calm yourself down and meditation. And I'm not saying it doesn't have some positive, benefits for people, but what they talk about is global coherence. And they talk about, like, they're talking about the, resonance from the heart, because your heart has an electromagnetic field, which is true. You know, that's why when they say people are magnetic, like some people are actually more magnetic literally than others. Like they have a longer, shorter range, but they estimate around 12 feet for your electromagnetic field, the resonance of the heart. So this is, that part is true. But now they're talking about using it to create this global coherence. And now they've gone a step further, and they're talking about heart-brain coherence. And this is, Barbara Marx Hubbard was a huge fan of Teilhard de Chardin, was, talking about creating a noosphere. This is the woman who, she told her friend Bucky, she calls him Buckminster Fuller, that she took it upon herself to rewrite the New Testament. It just needed rewriting. Right. And,
This is just, that's that whole creepy overlap we've gotten to last time. It's definitely very weird. Well, so think about what she's talking about, especially with the kind of flavor of believing that there's some kind of like new religious path through all of this, which is really terrifying, with what this little clip shows you that goes back to DARPA. And let's not forget, as we've already highlighted, the DARPA's intertwined, if not, I think, puppeteering of what we're watching right now through Altman and Musk and all these different projects that lead right back to what's happening.
You can literally scatter this stuff like dust or embed it into a sheet of paper. This was commercially released 10 years ago. It's a tiny computer, and it features data processing, data storage, wireless comms, and it's probably as close to the true smart dust vision from the early DARPA days as we've come so far. They're designed to harvest energy from the environment around them and to communicate via a mesh network.
And this is something we've talked about a lot, is this concern, like well before we got here. I think Whitney and I had a conversation about this during like the beginning of the COVID-19 timeframe, when we were just getting the early information about some of this and worried about whether there was some kind of an experiment around that. Like at the time, and perfectly relevant to today, we were talking about how she argued that they were failing essentially at trying to achieve, whether it's singularity or AGI or whatever we're talking about, and that they were trying to feign that. Because they want us to believe it so they can pump the information through and be like, hey, I said, doing in Israel right now with the lavender and Habsora and all that, Palantir. And so what's interesting is worrying about whether or not this was trying to find, like basically using us in real time to see if they could mesh the human brain, like to be able to get the most amount of data, because they couldn't figure out how to reach that. It was a theory, right? And so it's really interesting that we're talking about the meshed wire. So what he's showing you there in that clip was something so small that it's like scattering it like dust in the air that could land on your skin, and your own body's motion would give it energy, and it could relay information. I mean, this is the early stages of DARPA that we've talked about, and I'll even bring this up, which I think this is even crazier. This one always blows my mind because of how the year this is talking about this. So this is Charles Lieber, who played it. He was a central role with the creating of all of this, just like Bob Langer. And it was 2011 at Harvard, virus-sized transistors. And literally, as I always point out, he talks about this in how the lipid nano layer or the lipid layer is what got this inside of a cell. And it says when a man-made structure is as small as a virus or bacteria, let's just say a pathogen for an easier conversation, it may behave the way a biological structure does. And so my thing is always like, well, isn't it possible like this itself was what we ended up dealing with? Like maybe got a control, maybe it was design. Either way, the point is how clearly this is the level that we're at that long ago. So coming into today with what they're talking about, it seems this is what we've all been prepped for.
Yeah, there is a lot of information. I did a whole thread a while ago on the DARPA hydrogel, and they talk about and the hydra is represent like an indicative of the like actual hydra, like a parasite, and they have a whole model they lay out where this would be, it would act as a parasite, like a biological parasite. Yeah, but this is a synthetic hydrogel.
I think I think that we talk about the gels in this one. Yeah, right here. This is the DARPA's IVN program has since helped to finance and produce soft, flexible hydrogels that are injected just beneath the skin to perform health monitoring. It's all the stuff this is DARPA program stuff, guys, or the in vivo nano platforms.
Yes.
Which is like basically the mRNA platform, but in your body, right? I mean, this is what they've been doing. I think there's a lot of people that think that was already what was happening.
Right.
Like this is what we've been primed for, and now that's going to be executed. There's a lot of theories around this, but yeah, it's very clear that this is so let's talk about this. So the mRNA aspect of it is clearly, like Corey's Diggs, for example, made a whole statement about how, our whole point on the thread about how, even though we all know that's a concern, we should be fighting, that's happened. We're there already. Like, so that was more of like the way to get you over here fighting that while they're rolling out the AI infrastructure that will control all of it.
Yeah,
you know? So
that's what I'm kind of with.
What are your thoughts
on that? I think that's accurate. I think that's exactly what's going on. I do think there's, so I had written an article back in like 2021 about the shedding.
Who did?
I did.
Okay. Yeah. Like the spike protein shedding?
No, I really just about shedding. I laid out different types of shedding. That one of them
around
was
vaccinologies, right?
Yeah, that it wasn't necessarily just spike protein. That was a theory,
right? And
I wrote it as a speculative piece because it was 2021. There wasn't a whole lot of information that available, but I had 39 sources in my article, so it wasn't like speculative. I just pulled it out of my butt, kind of thing. Like
so, the thing about like the nanotech stuff. Some of these things are inherently speculative, no matter how far you go.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
exactly. But you sourced it well, so I think it's important.
Yeah, so it was based on some real research. It wasn't just, but of course, it's I have to speculate to some extent. I'm like tying together threads and data points that I don't have all the information to present hard evidence. But it was categorized as different types of shedding, but some of it was like more like electromagnetic type of computerized type of shedding rather than a biological.
So how does that take the form of? You're talking like electromagnetic wave kind of thing? Or how do you
the
frame
way that they were that the literature that I was citing was talking about it would be that it would be kind of there is a lot of information around the resonance of like women syncing their cycles.
Oh, I believe wholeheartedly in the idea. I think it's been proven scientifically, like an aura.
Or
like
no, they
energy.
Definitely that has been proven. But that they were talking about this being controlled through some sort of now if they put in something that is synthetic, and then that would be shedding. So it's not the So not like and then that would be creating some sort of a resonant. That
overlaps what we were just saying with like the heart brain thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And that's what some of this literature that I was citing, again, like that, now we have to speculate how that, I don't have the details of how that manifests.
Well, to me, it sounds more like we're getting into, like you were talking about, like the magnogenetic type dynamic where you're having some kind of a,
yeah, and what's so fascinating about that, fascinating and terrifying.
Yeah,
but
like everything we're talking
simultaneously, but it really is fascinating, is that a lot of where they're going, this overlaps with this whole AI, Stargate, but also like the Game B and all of these, what they call emerging technologies, right? The Web 3 that we're moving into, is a lot of this is predicated on theories of quantum mechanics. And quantum physics. And
Azure, part of the whole thing is the quantum computing dynamic from Microsoft, and they're a huge part of this.
Exactly. So, but even just in the biological sense, that's still, kind of the foundation of that is this quantum theory that we have some sort of a I don't want to say
we're all one kind of a thing.
Yeah, like exactly. That resonates. And so, but it is really interesting because when they talk about how everything's human centered, right? But they are talking about creating like this noosphere, a global brain extracting from us. And when they talk about just like extracting from, the Borg, exactly. But when they talk about extracting from us in the way that's happening currently, it's very tangible. I mean, obviously, like the World Wide Web already does this. Like AI already takes information we put in, right? So that's the global intelligence is already information that humans have fed it. And of course the programmers have designed behind it, in order to curate it, but it's still, that's very tangible. But what they're talking about is something that is very abstract, and it's really hard to know how much of it is provable for science and how much of this is theory. But either way, it's scary to me because they're trying to drive it that way.
Yeah.
So they're talking about this kind of quantum energy that they can extract from us. And when you look at actually the AI World Society talks about this, they talk about how it's going to be, it was an article from University of Amherst, Massachusetts, that talked about 6G and how they were going to use humans to power it.
See,
and in the AI World Society, they talk about now using like mitochondria, because that's where the ATP is housed. So this is where things get, it sounds abstract, it sounds crazy, but what I keep saying is at one point it was all theoretical, it was all just an idea, but the technology is catching up.
Yeah.
And so whether they get to where their goal is or not, but even if they get halfway there, I think it's going to be terrifying.
I agree. Well, I mean, this, like you were just highlighting, I mean, this perfectly overlaps with the worry of like, because this cryptocurrency mining for your body dynamic is not just about it's like your body becomes like a power source.
Yes.
And I think that's what this really is about. It's the tokenization of your life, like you were just saying, right? And so that whole thing is really concerning about how they can basically find ways to, use and I think what you're highlighting there is ways beyond what we can even really grasp right now. It's not just energy, but it's like some quantum level dynamic. Who knows? Maybe that's all fake, like you're saying.
And
but
even
I don't
if
think
it's fake, they're trying to convince you that it's real,
right.
They're operating on so even if it's a false, premise that they're operating on, they're building on top of that. And hopefully the foundation's so shaky, it all just implodes. But regardless, they're building upon that. And so the technologies that they're creating are now going to be driving you into this collective sphere. And that's very, very, and not only that, but they do have some very tangible, quantifiable, means of extracting, like they can put biosensors in you. They can do that now.
I think that's already happening.
If you were, I really think so too.
I mean,
if you chose to have it, I mean, they can do that now through these smart dust type of technologies. But what happens when you say, yeah, I want that? It's like people opting into the Neuralink, you know?
Well, I guarantee, like there's already going to be people that think that this, cool, I can, bring up some, whatever technological thing they think is cool and new. And it's like, well, that's, the gimmicky thing that gets you to join this whole dynamic. I mean, again, maybe we're wrong and it's going to save the planet. Like, I hope so, but I just don't. I think that the worry is obviously here, and I think we're rushing in. Like, look, guys, the history around this government or any government is pretty clear about how these things are rapidly produced and rushed for the interest of their national security, and very ever rarely truly concern themselves with the fallout, which generally always happens, and they rationalize it after the fact, and we fix those problems. I mean, look at the COVID-19 rollout. It's like from both Biden and Trump, and ultimately continue to pretend. I mean, this is one of the things that I think it was Michael Krieger was saying. It's like, doesn't this have the feeling like there was a script that was written, and that we were like supposed to be enamored with mRNA, and then they were going to roll it out with Trump, and it's like they just kind of kept going with the narrative, and we're all like, what is going on right now? Because they rolled it out as if we were all going to be like, hooray, mRNA. It seemed like a very weird thing, so I definitely get the sense that this whole thing, I mean, I feel that they know what they're doing. I think Donald Trump and the rest of it, I think that's my personal opinion, is aware of what this is. I could argue I could go along with the idea, like I think maybe with last time, that Trump is being convinced that this might be better. I would never dismiss that possibility. I know people like to believe that he's fine. I can see that. I can see how they could convince him that this is going to save America, maybe even in a business sense. I get it, but I think we have to all recognize
have it to compete with China.
That's what they said. I mean, even the national emergency they rolled out claiming about the border, one of his own guys on Fox were like, it's about AI in China. That's what he said. It's like,
I know. It reminds me a little of the Cold War, but
it really does. Well, it's one last thing, and then we could probably wrap with about almost 2 hours, is the China thing with TikTok. The way that went down made me I've always been of the mind that there's a lot more coordination than we see.
Always, we saw that. Cold War is a really good example.
Exactly.
But I think every war is a good example of that. But Cold War is really evident.
But after though, like I think that James Corbett has covered a lot about like whether through Israel or otherwise, like the secret kind of allowance of change of technology. Like they benefit in a lot of ways from this perceived. I do think there is division. I very much do.
Yeah, of course.
But at the same time, I think what happened with TikTok was, the guy was literally at Trump's inauguration, right? And so basically they brought down the thing under the guise that, well, we have to shut down because they're forcing us. And Trump gives them a 75-day pause, which all it really was. It wasn't, and they go, hey, saved it. But then he brings it back up. I'm like, okay, well, what changed? So you're just going to bring it back down to 75 days? Because he's still telling you have to sell to the United States entity. So it felt contrived. And then on top of that, remember that when it came back up, right out of the gate, and everyone was showing, and Free Palestine and Palestinian content was all being censored again. And so I'm like, to me, just the way it all went whatever political side or, whatever, is that it felt very controlled to make you think that it was a win. But I remember Elon Musk was being floated about he denied it, but buying TikTok. So I guess my point is, I feel like the whole thing is really coming together. And I think what it shows you is that, to the point about China, is that there's some bigger game being played and that they keep the adversarial dynamic going. So but at the end of the day, it's all, what's funny is everything they keep doing, like Zuckerberg and Bezos, the rest of them, it's like, okay, we just spent 4 years telling you these guys are the villains of the world, but now they're on our side. Unity, it's like, I guess, like, aren't they criminals? Like, it doesn't make sense. Why is that a good thing? I bet you we have that moment with like a China dynamic or something like that, where it becomes, we need the one world dynamic, but we need you to be along with it. That's just a worry that I have, but I feel like there's more coordination there.
I think there's some. Well, the whole TikTok thing is very interesting. I think it was also like a ploy to bring in the Project Liberty, which I'm really concerned about. Project Liberty, of course, it sounds like it's all about liberty and freedom and free speech. But it's like all about renewable energy. Which sounds kind of like carbon credits and, the net zero agenda.
Well, what's funny is renewable energy is inherently a positive thing, whether it's good, but the point is that it's like, that's not what they're really trying to achieve is the point. Or like sustainability. Nobody should be, it's a buzzword that gets turned into the bad thing.
They
all of a sudden
redefine
we
the
fight
terms.
the good thing because we think, it's this game that gets played. But I argue that it's
because they redefine
always
the terms. That's
exactly.
So in this game B, there's they actually admit it. So Jordan Hall, he was Jordan Greenhall, and actually his first name actually begins with an R. I don't know what's with all of his changing names, but now he's Jordan Hall. But he wrote this whole. They love Medium. They do all of their big white papers, if you will. I mean, they're articles, but they do them all on Medium. They're kind of blueprints. Jim Rutt has his on a journey to game B on there, but he has one is about the Civium project, and Jordan Hall talks about sovereignty. And he says, like right in this article, he talks about sovereignty is not what you think it is.
Of course.
It's not about like nation states having, independence and, autonomy. It's not about personal agency. I'm paraphrasing, but this is the gist of what he says. I mean, and he literally says this. He spells it out. And he said, that's not what it's about. And essentially, he says it's about responsibility, but the responsibility ends up being responsibility that guides you into the collective. It's this collective, collectivist mindset so that we can have collective intelligence and create the noosphere. But that's what they do. They always, and I found this when I was doing my natural assets research, they kept using the term regenerative farming. And this sounds great. I mean, who doesn't want organic practices and regenerative? Yeah. Like
that comes down to a freedom point, though. It should be the farmer's choice to decide how they want to do it.
It should, but but that's not what this is about.
Right. I agree.
But when you look at what regenerative actually means, it's all about surveillance. It's all about achieving net zero carbon emission, which is, first of all, impossible if you're dealing with a biological organic life.
And therein lies the point, isn't it?
They want a post-human world.
Right.
And that's why I keep bringing up the religious element, because these people really do want a post-human world. They hate humanity, and that you look at all of the, when I talk about theosophy, I always say that it's like little g Gnosticism. We talked about this, and I get a lot of pushback, and I'm like, literally, Madame Blavatsky, the grandmother of the Theosophist herself says that, the real God is Satan, Lucifer. It's right there in the text. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's so much out there that's right, that the obvious is, but it's an interesting point to think about what you were saying right there is, and to be clear, my audience is well aware, but the idea of like a renewable energy dynamic it's obvious how they're using that, right?
Yeah.
Like what they're putting forward right now as those things are, it's a ploy. And what's interesting to think about is, in a way, you could argue that maybe they're intentionally rolling these things out to fail. So we end up continually leaning into the thing that maybe not in the interest of human species continuing, like that mindset. But the way they're playing this, the climate change lie, the carbon lie, all these different things, it's interesting. But the point nonetheless being is that if there is a way to have energy that's not forced upon you, that is renewable, why would anybody not want that? It's the way that they're almost packaging it in a way to fail. But either way, it always comes down to personal choice and liberty, in my point. No matter what it is, you have the right to decide that. Like with the farmer, I would argue, though, that in most cases, the way that farmers were doing all this before the industrial was organic anyway.
Yeah.
That's what farmers' ancient practices have always been, same with Mexico and their corn, But so it's just interesting how
it's like now they keep saying that it's more expensive to, have organic produce, but
Well, that's because of the way they set it up.
Well,
right?
the reason it's more expensive is because the synthetic stuff is being subsidized.
Well, that too. Yeah, great point. Great point.
Like
but they also force all these regulations and BS on you that you like. If you just let farmers do their thing and let them grow their food, most of them would do that anyway. But the point is, this is where you get into a lot of different things. I always err on the side of complete, let him do his thing, and you can decide whether you want that product or not.
Yeah,
like the idea that
that's
to label
the
this,
free
label
market.
that. Exactly. But the problem today is that they've introduced all these things that are dangerous. The glyphosate Roundup nonsense, and I would prefer to know it was on there, but I would still err on the side of none of it, and I would make my own personal freedom choices, and we can decide to go with them or not. But I agree that at the end of the day, it's about getting back to those basics, and I think what they're doing is driving you to the position where they almost, in a way, they get you to reject the thing that might be in your best interest. Right. In a lot of this stuff, sustainability is something that we truly need, but what they're presenting as sustainability is not sustainability.
No.
And it's just this interesting game. So think about that in the context of all this, the mRNA, the artificial intelligence. I know it seems almost radical to some people, but I'm like, I think we need to have the conversation as whether we even want this at all, whether or not China or anybody else goes that direction. I know it always becomes, we have to, because I get the argument. Yeah. They're going to surpass this or be better. I mean, it's always about sovereignty and our choice until national security. It's just so frustrating. I just think we need to have that conversation, because when you get that false binary where it's like, you want Elons or you want Altmans, it's like, that feels pretty false to me, but I just hope we can show discernment, be skeptical. I think what Courtenay laid out today, what we've talked about, is just absolutely terrifying. And it's literally attached at the hip to what they're rolling out right now. So that's all. Just be careful,
I agree with all of that. Yeah. And I would add, I think transparency is really important. And unfortunately, when it comes national security, that's when we lose all transparency. Right. Because it becomes this is for your own good and parental guidance. And so, I mean, when you're talking about the farming, now Pfizer has they have rennet. And so rennet that they put in cheese.
What's rennet?
So rennet is like the coagulative agent for a lot of cheese. But now, so traditionally, like a real farmer would use animal rennet. But now they've moved towards, it's the enzyme that they use, but now they've 90% of American cheese is using a product from Pfizer that is genetically modified.
God, I gotta look into that. It's what it's called by chance?
No, it's not it's not called. Where I was going with that was just transparency. They're not obliged to disclose. So if it doesn't say animal rennet, I've started buying European. But if it doesn't say animal rennet, then it is likely Pfizer, GMO.
It's like a peel and all these different things we talked about. And see, what's funny is that just exactly what we were just saying. It's like, because of the way they've set this ridiculous thing up, it causes me to go, well, I demand to know that's in there. Right. And then all of a sudden, it's like it's and that's a logical thing to say. But the point is, we shouldn't have to be in this trap where we're forcing people to have to divulge, and that's where it becomes more expensive to go through. It's like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah. But see, it's almost designed that way. But it is. We do need to know where these things are. I wish we could have that with also the idea where, it's about the freedom and liberty is the most important aspect. Yes. We need to have these people that can, you shouldn't be forced into a situation where you have to oblige and lean into all these terrible practices just because they could be something bad in your food. But it's like, at the same time, it's just impossible,
Well, don't worry, because once this AI stuff is perfected, you're not going to have free will anymore. And that seems to really be their goal. They really want to put us into, I get pushback when I use the term noosphere, but this collective intelligence, global brain, whatever you want to call it. But once you're all subsumed into this, you will not have free will. And then these really, of course, people like Yuval Noah Harari say that we don't have it anymore anyway, even though that's what they want to upload to the cloud, upload our consciousness. So that's really, I think, the heart of everything is that we need to preserve the free will of humanity.
Yeah, I agree. Well, hopefully some of this stuff can start you on your own journey of investigation and look further into it. Please take the time to look through all the information, come to your own conclusions about it. That's where we have to be today. Because like we said in the beginning, people can be wrong, they can be tricked, or they could be lying to you. That's a constant universal possibility for everything anybody says at any time, no matter what their party name is or anything else. That's the only way we can go in the right direction, I think. Right?
I think so too.
Outcomes, principles, right? We just got to start, because right now, even, like we just talked about, even objective people can be played in using their emotions and what they want to see, because there are positive things happening, but just be aware that they're using, like we just said in the beginning, the best lies always include truth. Right?
Always.
That's exactly the point.
Always. And they outlined the NATO cognitive warfare document, laid out how they were going to use our emotions to create these cybernetic feedback loops to silo us and program us and control us, essentially.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And they highlight how they're going to use our emotions. So, yeah.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there.
Yeah.
And oops, I mean to bring that up. Thank you all for joining us today, episode 27. And I guess we'll see you next time. Remember, be a dissident.
Yes.